So they read more and more, and because they are highly motivated, their speed is phenomenal, their memory is incredible, and even their comprehension is admirable. So they are full of spiritual knowledge, and then they start feeling that I have now become deeply spiritual. The person can get distracted by many questions which are only tangentially related to spirituality. Questions like, can a great yogi live without food or water? Who are the yogis who are living without food and water? How can they do it? Why can they do it? Can I also do it? What happens to a person after death? Is it possible to communicate with the dead? What happens after rebirth? Is rebirth really true? What does an animal have to do to be born as a human being? If a human being is very bad, will he be reborn as an animal? How can we go back to past lives? Can we know something about the future? Now, these are all questions which are only very tangentially related to spirituality. And what were the questions asked? The first question asked was, have you changed your doctor within the last 5 years, or are you thinking of doing so? The second question was, if you have changed your doctor within the last 5 years or are thinking of doing so, what are the reasons? And you'll be surprised to know, not even one person said, I want to change the doctor because my doctor does not know enough. The passage is about the problems and pitfalls of knowing too much. Let's go over the passage. The mother says, it is not necessarily someone with experience who is most advanced. He lacks an element of simplicity, modesty, and the plasticity that comes from the fact that one is not yet totally developed. As one grows, something crystallizes in the head, it gets more and more fixed, and unless you try very hard, you finish by being fossilized. This is what usually happens to people, particularly those who have tried for some realization and succeeded in it, or those who have come to believe they have reached the goal. For me personally, I admit, I prefer for my work someone who knows very little, has not labored too much, but who has a great deal of aspiration, a great goodwill, and who feels in himself this flame, this need for progressing. He may know very little, may have realized still less, but if he has that within him, it is good stuff with which one can go very far, much further. So let's go over the passage slowly now. It is not necessarily someone with experience who is most advanced. Not necessarily, which means that it's not that experience always will be bad, but it is not necessary that someone with experience is necessarily also the most advanced. It has been said that wisdom, competence, they depend not just on experience, but on capacity for experience. For jobs, often the advertisement says that this job requires at least 10 years of experience in work of this type. One of the jokes going around is that if someone says that he has not 10, but in fact 20 years of experience already, the joke going around is, does he have 20 years experience, or does he have 1 year's experience repeated 20 times? Now there's a difference between the two. Which means that it's not just the experience, but also the capacity for experience that makes a difference. And that is what the mother is saying in this first sentence. And then she goes on to say, he, that is the person who has a lot of experience, lacks an element of simplicity, modesty, and the plasticity that comes from the fact that one is not yet totally developed. Which means that as a result of experience, one not only gains something, one also loses something. And what are the things that we lose? One of them is simplicity. Now, what is simplicity? Simplicity is being what a person is, not trying to make any effort to appear better than the person is. That is simplicity. At least that is one way in which the mother has looked at simplicity, and that she has considered to be one of the most important requirements for progress on the spiritual path. Be simple. That is how begins one of her most celebrated pieces of advice. Recently, Rajesh Khanna died, and you might have read in the newspapers a dialogue from Bawarchi. The dialogue went something like this: it is very simple to be happy, but it is very difficult to be simple. Now, why is it so difficult to be simple? It is difficult to be simple because of experience. Because a child is simple. For a child, it is not difficult to be simple, because the child does not have the experience. And therefore, experience, in fact, becomes a handicap. It becomes an obstacle on the path of being simple. The mother has given a beautiful example of what simplicity is like. She says that a flower is very simple. It starts as a bud, and then it opens up. Slowly, the bud opens, and we have the flower. And the flower's beauty is available for all to see, and the fragrance radiates, spreads all around without any discrimination. And all this development takes place without any announcement, without any noise, without any pretensions, and without any violent gestures. It just happens. And that is simplicity. Which means that while the flower is also putting in some effort to become a flower, for the bud to change into a flower, biologists, you know all that in great detail, what all hormones and other things are involved in making the bud develop into a flower. So there's a lot of inner work, inner effort going on in the bud as it becomes a flower. That type of inner work, inner effort in the sadhak, in the person on the spiritual path, is also quite acceptable. But not the type of work that involves making a lot of noise, making a lot of show, and so on. So that is what is not simple. So simplicity is not that it's lack of effort, but it is effort that is necessary, effort that is calm and steady, patient, perseverant, but not strained by any anxiety for achievement, and not without any and also effort which is without any pretensions about being better than the person actually is. And that is exactly what the child also does. The child is also putting in a lot of effort to develop. The child is developing. In fact, the rate at which a child develops can hardly be matched by any adult. You know, what all does a child achieve within the first 10 years of life, and then in the next 10 years, I mean, phenomenal growth and development. But then all this is taking place very simply because the child has not yet become complicated the way adults are. So this is simplicity. Then another beautiful chain of thoughts in this context, the mother says, one must be spontaneous in order to be divine. One must be perfectly simple in order to be spontaneous. One must be absolutely sincere in order to be perfectly simple. To be absolutely sincere is not to have any division, any contradiction in one's being. So you can see there's a chain of events involved, and the chain begins with not having any contradiction in one's being. Now, what is the type of contradiction that we can have in our being? You know, the totality of the being is not just the body, but also the emotions, the intellect, and of course our divine essence, the soul. And this soul also does participate in our day-to-day affairs of life through the psychic being. I'll not go over into this in detail because most of you are familiar with this. So I can see a few new faces. But I mean, this is simple, that the body, the emotions, and the intellect are our surface instruments, and they should be working in light of our divine essence, the soul, but very often they don't. Because, you know, the emotions pull us towards what feels good, and what feels good is not necessarily really good. The intellect pulls us what will be on the whole beneficial, what will lead to some worldly gain, avoid some worldly loss. But these considerations also don't necessarily lead us to what is really good. It is the soul that gives us the most authentic choices in life. And since we have all these three types of voices coming within us, there's often a conflict between them, which means there's a division. So when there is a division between different parts of the being, one cannot be absolutely sincere. Because for being completely sincere, it is important that at least these three basic elements, the emotions, the intellect, and the soul, should be speaking in the same voice. Because otherwise what will happen is that there will be a tendency to lead a life which is driven by the emotions and the intellect, but to try and appear as if it is being guided by the soul. So there's a division. On one hand, we have all the pulls and the temptations and the distractions because of the emotions and the intellect. But on the other hand, we know that is not the best choice, and therefore we try to appear as if we are being guided by the soul. So there's a division. And therefore, we cannot be completely sincere. We are trying to appear better than we are. We are living a life guided by one level of the being and actually trying to show that it is being lived at another level. We are living it at a lower level of consciousness. There's an effort to show that we are living it at a higher level of consciousness. So how can we be completely sincere? So to be sincere, one should be able to overcome this division between different parts of the being. And then what happens as a result of this? Sincerity, if one is able to avoid this division, this sincerity leads to simplicity. Then a person can be simple, because then the person doesn't have to put in any effort to appear better than the person is. And what is the result of this simplicity? The person becomes spontaneous, because the person doesn't have to think too much about how exactly to say something, how exactly to do something, so that my inner motivations cannot be detected. So the person therefore can be completely spontaneous. And if the person is spontaneous, then what does it lead to? It leads to manifestation of the divinity within. That is, the soul starts manifesting. So there's that entire chain. So in order to be able to manifest the divinity, one should be spontaneous. To be spontaneous, one has to be simple. To be simple, one has to be sincere. And to be sincere, there should be no divisions between different parts of the being. And this simplicity is something that suffers as a result of too much of experience, or at least it may suffer because of too much experience. And therefore, while experience gives us a lot, it also takes away something. And one of the important things that takes away is simplicity. And we have seen how important simplicity is for a person to be able to make spiritual progress. What is the second thing that we lose? That is modesty. The child who doesn't know much, in any case, is not proud of what it knows. But after a person has experience and knows something, then there is always a risk that the person may no longer be modest. Another thing that is lost is plasticity. Plasticity is the flexibility of the mind. In yoga we talk about flexibility of the body. Not only the body, but the mind also needs to be flexible. And as a person grows older, generally the flexibility goes down, because the person loses both the capacity to learn new things and to unlearn what the person already knows. Both these things are important for flexibility. To be able to get rid of the fixed notions that a person has acquired, if they are found to be faulty, defective, not the highest, then one should be able to unlearn them. At the same time, one should be able to learn new things. Unless one is able to unlearn, unless there's some space created, some vacuum created, how will new things be able to get in? So unlearning and learning both are important, and generally they suffer as a result of experience. So this plasticity is lost. So the person who has experience lacks an element of simplicity, modesty, and the plasticity that comes from the fact that one is not yet totally developed. So the one who is not actually totally developed, like a child, has all these elements: simplicity, modesty, and plasticity. As one grows, something crystallizes in the head. It gets more and more fixed, and unless you try very hard, you finish by becoming fossilized. Now, what is a fossil? At least students of biology would all know that a fossil is something that was once alive but has been dead for a long time, usually hundreds or thousands of years. But it has retained some of its form so well, it has preserved that form so well, that even today we can make out what it was those hundreds or thousands of years ago. So the outer form is intact, but it has become so rigid that it cannot change. It is dead and unchangeable. So that is what can happen with age. One can get fossilized, that is, lose this capacity to change. One can only get a glimpse of what once was, but the person is, for all practical purposes, no longer really there. So as one grows, something crystallizes in the head, that is, gets hardened like a crystal, it gets more and more fixed, and unless you try very hard, you finish by becoming fossilized. Which means by trying, one can avoid this process. And this is a process that is required not only on the spiritual path, but even otherwise. It has been generally seen that dementia, Alzheimer's, and all these problems which come with old age are seen much less if the person continues to remain mentally active. As they say, use it or lose it. Either use the head or lose it. And therefore, one by trying, and trying essentially means remaining mentally active. By trying, one can keep one's mind active and prevent this process of fossilization, at least delay it, slow it down. And this is what usually happens to people, particularly those who have tried for some realization and succeeded in it, or those who have come to believe they have reached the goal. Now, this is particularly relevant to the spiritual path, that this is a process which can happen also on the spiritual path, particularly in those who start with an aspiration for a realization. Now, what is realization? Realization is becoming real. Now, things which we know at a mental level are not really real to us. They become real to us only when they become a part of our experience. So the person has this aspiration that this mental knowledge should become real to me. And some people do sometimes get to that stage of realization. And when they get to that stage of realization, they go through this process of losing their simplicity, modesty, plasticity, and they become more rigid. And this is something that is beautifully summed up in one of the well-known verses from the Isha Upanishad, which was one of the favorite Upanishads of Sri Aurobindo. This is the 9th verse of Isha Upanishad. Andha tamah pravishanti ye avidyamupasate tato bhuya evate tamo yau vidyayamrata. Andha tamah pravishanti. They enter darkness. Who enter darkness? Ye avidyamupasate. Those who have avidya, those who are after avidya, those who enter the path of avidya, which means those who lack knowledge, those who have ignorance, they enter darkness. That is understandable. It is the next line that is a paradox. Tato bhuya evate tamo. In still greater darkness are those. Who are those who are still in greater darkness? Yau vidyayamrata. Those who have the knowledge, those who have seen the knowledge. These are the ones who are in still greater darkness. Now, how can it be that those who have the knowledge are in darkness? They are in still greater darkness because they have seen some aspect of the truth. They have achieved a certain realization, and this realization could be that they have discovered that behind all this phenomenal universe, this phenomenal world, is an underlying imperishable reality, the divine. That is what is truly imperishable and everlasting. They have seen this truth, they have realized it. Now they feel that if that is so, then this world as we see it is only an illusion. If it is an illusion, it is not worthy of any interest. And therefore, they start treating the world as an obstacle, a smoke screen that actually hides the true reality from us. And they start treating the body as an encumbrance on the path to getting completely merged with that ultimate nameless, faceless, formless reality. Which means that they reject the body, they reject the world, they reject worldly life. Now, this happens because they have seen the ultimate reality, but they have missed one point there. What is the point that they have missed? What they have missed is that this world is not really an illusion, but it is a manifestation of the divine. It is the same divine in another form. It has put on a form while manifesting in the world, and therefore, the world is not to be rejected. The worldly life is not to be rejected, but these should be transformed to befit the one that they manifest. That is what the integral yoga is all about, not rejecting the world, but transforming it. Now, by missing this second point, what happens is that they know only part of the truth, and while they are ready to acknowledge that imperishable, everlasting reality, they are accepting only one form of it. They are rejecting it in another form. The very reality which they consider to be the ultimate truth, they are rejecting it in the manifest form. And therefore they are in a darkness. But why still greater darkness than those who are ignorant about this? Those who are ignorant about this truth, this truth about everything being a manifestation of the divine, or the divine being the ultimate everlasting reality, those who are ignorant of this, there is at least a hope that one day they will realize this truth, they will get to this knowledge. The world has enough opportunities for us to push us in that direction. So they will realize it one day. But those who have realized this knowledge, but have realized it only partially, they are in still greater darkness because they also have this supreme satisfaction, this complacency, which comes from knowing everything. Yes, I am one notch above the rest of humanity. I know what nobody else knows. I have seen what nobody else has seen. And therefore, there is not even much of a hope that they can be redeemed. And therefore, they are in a still greater darkness. So that is what the mother is saying, that this is what usually happens to people, particularly those who have tried for some realization and succeeded in it. So by trying for a realization and succeeding in it does not ensure that this process of losing simplicity, modesty and plasticity, this will not occur. So even on the path of realization, after the realization, these pitfalls still remain. And then she goes on to say, or this could happen to those who have come to believe they have reached the goal, which means that this is a still greater risk. Those who have not even achieved the realization, but they feel that they have realized at least something or they have reached the goal. That is, even the fact that they have reached a realization is an illusion. They feel so, but actually they have not reached. Now, to whom can it happen? It can happen a lot to people who start believing that, well, since I have this aspiration, I should learn something about these things. Then, they start delving into the books which deal with spiritual topics. They enjoy them. These spiritual books can be very pleasing to read because they're full of beautiful, noble thoughts, bring a lot of peace of mind. So they start reading. They read more and more. The more they read, the more they find there is still to read. So they read more and more, and because they are highly motivated, their speed is phenomenal, their memory is incredible, and even their comprehension is admirable. So they are full of spiritual knowledge, and then they start feeling that I have now become deeply spiritual. Now, one really does not become deeply spiritual just by knowing more and more, because knowledge cannot be a substitute for practice and experience. Spirituality is not about knowing more and more spiritual truths. Spirituality is about rising in consciousness, and rising in consciousness comes from making those choices in life consciously, which come from the deepest part of our being, the soul or the divine essence. When we make those choices, gradually we go through that process of growth of consciousness, a gradual disappearance of the discrepancy between the emotions, the intellect, and the soul. The discrepancy starts reducing, the divisions in different parts of the being, they start reducing, and then that chain starts, which leads us towards simplicity and spontaneity. It is that process which spirituality is about, and for that we don't really have to know too much. People who get obsessed with knowledge and start treating knowledge as a substitute for this practice and experience are in a sort of a trap which one may call the scholastic trap, the trap of knowing too much. And this can happen not only because the person treats knowledge as a substitute for practice and experience, but also because the person can get distracted by many questions which are only tangentially related to spirituality. Questions like, can a great yogi live without food or water? Who are the yogis who are living without food and water? How can they do it? Why can they do it? Can I also do it? What happens to a person after death? Is it possible to communicate with the dead? What happens after rebirth? Is rebirth really true? What does an animal have to do to be born as a human being? If a human being is very bad, will he be reborn as an animal? How can we go back to past lives? Can we know something about the future? Now, these are all questions which are only very tangentially related to spirituality. They deal with occult subjects. And Sri Aurobindo has warned that it is very unsafe to try and get into these occult subjects without first addressing the needs for psychic and spiritual transformation. Start with simple things, what actually has to be done. And that is generally enough. One doesn't have to get lost in all these questions, because life is about, the purpose of life is to grow in consciousness, for which we have to do something very simple. All those simple things, just making the right choices in life which come from the deepest parts of our being, choices which are driven by love and compassion, that is what spirituality is about, that is what the purpose of life is about. Life is not about forcing the divine to reveal those secrets which it has kept for our own good. If we had to know all these things, he would have told them to us. The fact that we do not have the capacity to know all these occult things is because it is good for us not to know them. And therefore, this is not what spirituality is about, and people sometimes just enjoy getting into these discussions. It is good intellectual entertainment, but doesn't lead to any spiritual progress. So that is what the mother is saying, that if a person has achieved realization, he can still be in trouble because of feeling that he has achieved the realization, and the one who thinks that he has achieved realization is probably also in great trouble because he is just lost in a lot of knowledge. So that is the difficulty in knowing too much. I thought at this point I'll give you a slight musical interlude. So just one stanza, which says that I know nothing about yoga and I have no knowledge. All what I am interested in is the mother's feet, taking refuge in her, serving her. That is all that I aspire for. Then let's go on with this passage further. What are the types of persons mother wants to serve her? That's what she's talking about. For me personally, I admit I prefer for my work someone who knows very little, has not labored too much, but who has a great deal of aspiration, a great goodwill, and who feels in himself this flame, this need for progressing. So the person need not have much knowledge, in fact should not have too much knowledge, and he should not have labored too much. You know, there's a difference between a calm and steady, patient and perseverant effort, and labor which is full of strain, anxiety, eagerness to get there. While a steady and persistent, calm and patient effort is desirable, that type of anxiety and strain is not. And that is what the mother is trying to say, that who has not labored too much, which means the person has not been over anxious to get somewhere with a strong aspiration which borders on a desire to, the difference between a desire and an aspiration, Desires can be very intense and also impatient. And also about anything, and that includes the spiritual path, because one can have an intense and impatient desire to reach the summit in the spiritual path, and that can be sometimes worse than wanting to achieve, say, wealth, name and fame and so on. Why it can be worse is that at least the person who is trying to achieve worldly success, power, prestige, money and so on, at least has out of decency, out of some consideration for ethics, he tries to be a little modest and he tries to conceal it. He doesn't want it to be seen very easily. Sometimes a person who is on the spiritual path and has the same sort of anxiety is equally absorbed in himself, because what is important in both cases is both want something for themselves as individuals, which means that the absorption in the personal self, in the individual self, is total. The only thing is what they want is different, and the person on the spiritual path doesn't even have any scruples about what the person wants, because the person feels that I want something which is highly desirable and laudable. And therefore, and this is the type of labor which is not really desirable. So the person who has not labored too much, but who has a great deal of aspiration. So it should be just a sincere, intense, calm and patient and perseverant aspiration. A great goodwill, and who feels in himself this flame. Now this goodwill part is again very important. Goodwill means the person is not totally self-absorbed. He is interested in others. And this is something which has been found to be applicable not only to the spiritual path but also in the world. You might have heard of the concept of emotional quotient, the EQ. And one of the psychologists, Daniel Goleman, he came up with this concept. And this concept is based on the fact that when you study people in the world, you find that the most successful people are not those who know the most. These are not the people who got the highest grades in school and college, but people who have some other qualities. Of course, they have to have a moderate amount of knowledge and competence that is necessary, but then the most successful of people in the world are those who also have, along with that, two other things which are a part of emotional intelligence. One is empathy for others, and the other is good relationships. Now this empathy can be of three types. One is cognitive empathy, that is the ability to see the other person's point of view, the ability to understand others. That is cognitive empathy. The second is emotional empathy, that is the person should be able to feel for somebody else. The person should be able to put oneself in the other person's shoes and feel the joy and the sorrow of the other person. That is emotional empathy. And the third aspect of empathy is empathic concern, which means the willingness to do something for somebody if somebody is in trouble, not only feeling his trouble, but also doing something about it. So this is one quality which people have who are highly successful in the world. So close to spirituality. Choice is driven by love and compassion. And what is the second thing that these people have is good relationships, which means they cultivate relationships, they nurture relationships, they are not afraid of dealing with other people, and relationships can be cultivated and nurtured only if a person has a genuine concern for others. Because long-term relationships can't really continue just through a pretension, just through hypocrisy. Long-term relationships would require a genuine involvement. And which means that if a person is empathic, he is also likely to have good relationships. And this is the type of people who are most successful in the world. And this is behind the concept of the emotional quotient. So emotional quotient is not IQ. IQ can probably predict the grades in school and college, but that is not what predicts success in life. Not only doesn't predict success in life, it also does not predict happiness in life. Victor Hugo asked this question long back. Are we good because we are happy, or are we happy because we are good? The verdict is quite clear. We are happy because we are good. If we are good, we'll also be happy. If we are happy, we'll also be successful in the world. And modern medicine tells us that if we are happy, we'll also be healthy, because there's an intimate relationship between the mind and the body. So what else does a person want? To be healthy, to be happy, to be successful, the person has to be good. So basically, we have to be good. That is the simplest way of saying that the person has to make the right choices in life. The person has to be spiritually evolved, has to be interested in spiritual progress. So that is all. So essentially, the simplest way to put it is the person should be good. Are there any practicing doctors? Sunil Chumbar is there. Anyone else? No? Anyway, it will be interesting for you to know. It applies also to doctors. In Los Angeles, California, there was a study done in the 1990s where they asked two simple questions in an upscale neighborhood, affluent neighborhood. 1,500 questionnaires were sent, about 1,000 replies came. So fairly large sample. And what were the questions asked? The first question asked was, have you changed your doctor within the last 5 years, or are you thinking of doing so? The second question was, if you have changed your doctor within the last 5 years or are thinking of doing so, what are the reasons? And you'll be surprised to know, not even one person said, I want to change the doctor because my doctor does not know enough. The fact that the doctor has a degree generally tells the patient that the doctor knows enough. The doctor has the knowledge. So none of them said that my doctor doesn't know enough. What they said was that the need for changing the doctor was that they were troubled by the insensitivity to their needs, or poor communication techniques, or by lack of respect for the patient's views, or by overemphasis on technology. These were the reasons why they wanted to change the doctor. And some of the typical responses were, I left the doctor's office feeling worse than when I came, and that is not what I went to him for. I waited almost 2 hours for my turn, and no sooner did I get into the doctor's office than he became involved in a long personal telephone call. I don't think the doctor really understood what I was saying. He put me into a long series of tests even before I finished telling him my symptoms. The doctor smoked, and I thought that anyone who had so little regard for his own health should not be entrusted with mine. My doctor had gained a lot of weight since our last meeting and was quite obese, and I had difficulty in taking him seriously. When he told me what was wrong, it was so cold and matter-of-fact that I felt he didn't care whether I would get well or not. The doctor sent me bad news by registered mail. I suppose he wanted to protect himself, but he lost a patient. I am not a legal item or oddity, but a human being. The prescription the doctor gave me had terrible side effects he didn't warn me about. I don't think he respected my intelligence or my right to ask what I thought were relevant questions. These were some of the typical responses they gave why they wanted to change their doctor. Nothing to do with knowledge of the doctor. That was taken for granted. If the doctor has a degree, he has the knowledge. Same about teachers. I don't have a study to quote, but I can assure you that the best of teachers and the most loved teachers are not those who know the subject the most. Again, it is said that there are 3 things which are important for becoming a good teacher. One is you should, and in that order, you should love the students, you should know how to teach, and you should know the subject. That is the order in which it matters whether you are a good and loved teacher. So the first thing is you should love your students, which means that whether you look at teachers or you look at doctors or any successful people in any field, as the emotional quotient people have found, those who have done research on emotional quotient, success in any area, whether in the world or on the spiritual path, does not depend upon knowing too much. There is a verse in the Kathopanishad, Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo na medhaya na bahuna shrutena yame vaisha vrinute tena labhastasyesha atma vivrinute tanum swam. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo. The true self, the Atma, cannot be found from pravachan, eloquent teaching, na medhaya na bahuna shrutena, not by intelligence and by listening to things, learning much. Yame vaisha virunute tena labhastasyaisha, but it can be found by someone who has been chosen by him, which means the person has to be chosen by the infinite. He who chooses the infinite has been chosen by the infinite. This is one of the famous quotations of Sri Aurobindo. So, if Lord has chosen him, then he will find him, which means that it comes primarily through grace. The way Arjun was picked up by Krishna, I love you, you are very dear to me, so I'll give you that Divya Chakshu so that you will be able to see me. So, it's not through learning, listening, thinking that one finds the true self or the Atma. It is only when he has chosen us. And then what happens? Atma vivrunate tanum swam. Then the spirit, the divine spirit, reveals its body to us. Now, before I throw it open to questions, I'll ask myself one question on your behalf. And the question is, if knowing much is of no use and listening to these discussions is not of much use, then why do we have these discussions and why am I trying to learn so much? You may not ask out of politeness, but let me try to answer this question as well as I can. Knowledge is, not a substitute for experience or practice, but knowledge can be a good trigger. It can be a good trigger for arousing the curiosity of a person to go towards practice and experience. So it's not a substitute, but it can trigger that, and that is why sessions like this are important. They also serve another important purpose in today's busy, stressful life. People who come here week after week, many of them are the same people. When they see the same faces, it becomes a social support system in itself. They start sharing their joys and sorrows after the satsang when they go out. So they get a lot of comfort by listening to what they listen here. They get comfort when they talk to each other outside. Sometimes they stay back till lunch, have lunch in the dining hall. And that's how new relationships get established. And this type of social support systems have become very important because the role that the family was playing earlier is weakening. And in any case, within the same family, you rarely find people who are all on the same wavelength. You very often find them outside the family. That's a very common thing. Here, because of a certain type of activity, that type of self-selection has already taken place. People with a certain bent of mind tend to come here, and when they meet each other outside, the relationships get established very quickly. So that is why these sessions are important, both as a trigger for pushing the person a little, providing that little nudge to go towards practice and experience. And then why do people like me try to learn? Firstly, let me confess, I don't know too much. And I don't try to know too much. Seeing my interest in these subjects, there are so many people who try to force books on me. Believe me, I have to be it becomes very difficult for me to be both polite and at the same time frank, to tell them that please, don't give me all these books, I don't have time to read them. They think that if I'm interested in spirituality, this is a book you will like very much. So many books they try to force on me, and I have to be sometimes polite, sometimes discreet, but the fact is that very often I end up telling them that I know it's a very good book, that there are excellent books which are lying in my house completely unread. I'm quite content to die without reading them. I don't want to know too much. Because the mother has given me the gift of communication, so I think I can serve her best by communicating through speaking and writing. And what I already know is quite enough for me to be able to communicate that, so I don't want to know more. Because knowing more and more make me a more learned man, but then I have to divide the time between what will make me a more learned man and what I will be able to do for others by communicating. So I prefer communication. So I have to tell them so often that there's no shortage of books even in my house. They're lying there. I feel a little guilty that I'm going on holding on to them, but I'm quite content to die without reading them. But at the same time, a certain amount one has to know, and I don't try to get into too many obscure subjects, occultism and this and that. I stick to simple things. The other part is, still one has to know a considerable bit to be able to communicate. About that, Sri Ramakrishna has given a very good explanation. He says that yes, if you have to talk to others, then you have to know something. Because a needle may be enough to commit suicide. But if you have to commit a murder, you need a bigger weapon. So if you have to work only for your own spiritual progress, very little knowledge is enough. Like a needle is enough for suicide. But if you have to commit a murder, which means you have to influence others, you have to radiate it to others, you have to communicate to others, then you need a bigger weapon, which means you know a little more. You have to know a little more. So that is why I have made some effort to learn something. So I have answered that question which you might have asked or might have hesitated to ask. Now you can ask any more questions. Yes, how to get over the division within oneself. There is nothing which will do it in one stroke. It is a process, you see. It's not an event that there is a division and now after this event there's no division. It's a gradual process. Because these conflicts keep coming till quite an advanced stage in this life. The conflicts do come because these different voices, the emotions, the intellect and the soul, they can't always agree. So these conflicts do come. But then gradually the conflict becomes less. It becomes easier to listen to the voice of the soul. It becomes easier to act on that voice. And every such step, when we listen to that voice, means the next time it will be easier. The emotions and the intellect will start getting transformed so that they'll gradually start speaking in the same voice as the soul. So it's a gradual process by which all this will happen.